It is really a sight to behold, seeing plants overflowing their pots with their lushness, with their beauty, and that is really true when it comes to succulents and when it comes to clumping succulents. So I have here a few examples of my clumping succulents that are really lush and really beautiful, and I'm really proud of them. And I thought that it would be really nice to show you these varieties just so you know which ones to pick if you really want these clumping, really lush looking succulents in your collection. So here I have 12 different varieties. I've got Echeverias, Graptopetalums, and I've got some Sedums, Cotyledon, and some Hawarthia. So I think that we're gonna start with our recently featured plants here on the channel. So this is our Graptopetalums, starting with this Myrinae. So you can see here that it's really lush, really beautiful succulent. Okay, so I've had this for about a year now, and it didn't do anything for about 6 months in my care. I believe for about half that time, half a year, it didn't do anything. It stayed small, it stayed compact, and it wasn't as lush as this one. So it started looking like this when I had it repotted into a good potting mix, and once a pot that I place it in really retains moisture, because it used to be in a clay pot, and I was actually very careful with it before because I didn't want it to die. So it was in a clay pot and it wasn't doing anything, so I had it repotted into a plastic pot, and now it's looking really lush. So I believe that with these small leaf type of clumping succulents, you really want their potting mix to retain a little bit of moisture. You can probably use a little bit more of organic materials in it, just so it can retain some moisture, so the plant can really grow. Because if it dries out very quickly, the leaves will tend to desiccate, it will tend to dry out very quickly as well. So that's the tip that I would give with this one. Same with the Medoza I have here. So this is, I bought this at the same time that I bought that Myrinae, and you can see here that it's already looking lush as well. Really beautiful, really stunning succulent. Now I would just be mindful with this plant, since a lot of sellers will be selling this as a very immature, very young plant, so you will not have these thick stems on it. So probably if you're buying from overseas, from Korea, you can already have some corking on your plants. But if you're buying this from local propagators, you might not have that corking on the stem of your succulents. So you have to be very patient with it, because sometimes this plant will not look really lush if it's not yet mature, and it can tend to drop a lot of leaves while it's still young. So you have to be very patient with it. So this one also started looking beautiful at about this year. So last year, when it was still in my care, when it was already about 4 or 5 months in my care, it wasn't doing anything. So I just waited for it for a very long time, and it started becoming lush again. So really nice, really beautiful succulent. But if you can probably find a more reputable seller that sells really mature, really lush succulents, then you might have early success with the Graptopetalum Medoza. I would also say that these clumping succulents, you don't have to rush propagating them, since a lot of people, once they see 2 succulents in the same pot, so once they see like there's 2 succulents in this pot, so they will already think that, oh, I have to divide them, I have to propagate them already because they're already 2 heads. But no, some succulents actually look better if they're clumping in a single pot. So some succulents here actually will not clump for very long. So I have here my Pakifi Tomato baby fingers. So what I was meant to say is, some succulents will not clump right away. So some succulents will take time before they clump, before they start growing a lot of pups. This Pakifi Tomato, you can see here, this baby fingers. I would say that this is a slower growing succulent. So if you can buy this in clumps, then I would recommend that, so that the plant will look lush right away. But if you're buying this as a single stem plant, then I think that it will be not a very nice investment, not a very good investment, since the plant is clumping by nature. So it looks better if there's a lot more of the plant in a single pot. So if you're buying a single stem succulent, single stem Pakifi Tomato, it might take a very long time before it can clump. Which is also why I would recommend that if you've got a plant that has several stems on it, you just plant them together. They look much better that way. And I would also say that if you plant them together, their potting mix will dry up much quicker, since they have more roots to absorb the water on their potting mix. So I would really recommend that if you've got similar plants, just pot them up in the same pot, and it will be much more beautiful for them, and they will perform much better if they're in the same pot. So I have here my more nondescript succulent. This is a variegated pickle plant. So you can see here, this is a really lush looking green type succulent, and you can see here that it has a lot of pups. It has a lot of babies underneath it, so it's a very clumping succulent. I believe that this is one of the faster growing succulents. Here it's a type of ice plant. It's not a crassulaceae plant, so it's separate from that. It's more related to our lithops. So if you want this really nice, really cute looking succulents, and I believe that these ice plants, they take to tropical climates much better than our other crassulaceae plants. So I believe a lot of people have success with these ice plants here in the Philippines. So this is a type of Delosperma, and there's a more common variety of this, which is green, and I think that it's a really nice, really lush clumping type of succulent. So if you want that, a clumping type succulent that doesn't need a lot of care and that will trail and hang later on, I would recommend our pickle plant. I think it's much more easier to care compared with our other portulacas. So there are portulacas out here that are thin leaves, so those need a lot of watering really. But this one, once you manage to establish it, it doesn't need a lot of watering since the leaves are a bit thick. It can tolerate a little bit of neglect. On our other much more non-popular clumping succulent, this is a Cotyledon Pendants. You can see here, this is already a dried succulent. I actually had it watered since recently, but the plant is not performing very well since it's very hot in my location. But you can see here that since I bought this, it has already developed a lot. It has already a lot more leaves and much more brighter farina, but recently it's suffering due to our heat in my location. So I've been giving this more shade right now, and I think that I will also be watering this soon so that the leaves won't wither out and die. So I've been very careful with this Cotyledon. Now I find that this one is much more easier to care for compared with our other Cotyledons. So we have our orbiculatas and we have our tomentosa, the bear's paw Cotyledon. So I find those much more difficult. So if you want a Cotyledon that really clumps up very easily, you can try these pendants. It's a really easy type succulent. I would just say that when it comes to Cotyledons, they will not propagate via leaf. So if you have a Cotyledon, don't try to leaf propagate it. Just cut off a stem from it and reroot it, and it will become you will have much more plants. So that's how you propagate the Cotyledon. And I would just say that you don't have to worry about propagating this because this plant will really branch out right away. So I have my other Cotyledons here in my care, so they really branch out quickly. And what I would say, probably Cotyledons are also monocarpic succulents. So once they flower, the stem that flowered will die. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Cotyledons are. So you just have to be very patient with them, wait for them to branch out before you propagate them. And if they flower, then they're gone. So that's just how they are. But you might not have to worry about that a lot since they branch out very quickly. And also I would just add that when it comes to Cotyledons like those, be careful not to eat them because they're poisonous. So some succulents will be nice, okay? Some succulents will not be very poisonous like those, but Cotyledons are one of the more poisonous type of succulents out there. So just a fun fact. Okay, now we have our sedums. I have my Sedum rubrotinctum right here. So this is one of the better looking rubrotinctums here in my care. My other pork and beans sedums are actually suffering right now due to the heat. So we have this weird weather here in the Philippines, which we get a lot of rain and then we get heat because it's summertime in the northern hemisphere, but we're already getting a lot of rain. So it's really confusing for some succulents, but I think that this will be able to push through. So I will just have to be mindful with caring for them. So a lot of people actually here in the Philippines will have the Sedum rubrotinctum jelly bean. They will probably care for them for about a few months or about a few weeks, and then they will die, and then they will have to be replaced again. So that's just how sedums are. They're very fast growing once they are growing well, and if the temperatures are no longer right for them, then they will just die back. So really, if you're looking for a sedum that is much more permanent, that doesn't die back very quickly, I would recommend our Pachyphyllum and our burrito, since those are much more longer lived compared with the Sedum rubbertinctum. So here is my Pachyphyllum. I think Pachyphyllums, this jelly bean sedum, I think this is much more sturdier compared with our rubbertinctum. So I have had this for a while right now. So I have another Pachyphyllum right here that has flowered already. So this is one of my Pachyphyllums here. It has dry leaves, okay? So I featured this in a care guide video about a few months ago, and it has already produced a lot of growth. So you can see here, it's really beautiful. It has these light colored green leaves that once you make it stress, it will turn really red and pink. So I think that it's a really beautiful succulent, and it's one that doesn't drop a lot of leaves very quickly compared with our Sedum rubbertinctum. That one tends to drop a lot of leaves very quickly. This one, not so much. It will hold on to its leaves for much longer, and it can tolerate a little bit more of drought, so it doesn't need to be watered very quickly. Our Sedum rubbertinctum, if you don't water those, that will drop its leaves right away. But this one, even if I neglect it, it will hold on to its leaves much better. So I think that if you want something more permanent that is a clumping succulent, I would recommend this one. Just be patient with the plant because it will not branch out very quickly. So this one stem actually has about 3 side branches right now, but it's looking like it's clumping because it has another branch right here. So there's actually 4 branches in the same pot. So I think that it will only look like it's a clumping succulent if you plant a lot. So I would also recommend that if you want this plant to look like it's lush right away, that you just buy 2 or 3 plants and you just plop them in the same pot together, just so that they will look lush. They will look lush and they will look like they're already clumping succulent. I have here my other Echeverias. Okay, so before we go to the Echeverias, since they're already everyone's favorite, let me just feature this one quickly. This is a Hawarthia cymbiformis, and of all the Hawarthias that I've encountered, I believe that the cymbiformis and the hybrids it has are the most clumping type ones. Our much more expensive, much more rare type of Hawarthias actually doesn't produce a lot of pups right away, but this one, the cymbiformis varieties, are ones that will really clump very quickly. So this is probably a cymbiformis hybrid, and we have our cuspidata here, which already has produced a lot of pups for me. So if you want a Hawarthia that is clumping, I would recommend this variety. So aloes can be clumping as well. The common ones, they will tend to produce side branches very quickly, but I don't have a lot of clumping aloes right now, so I think that we will be skipping that. I will probably be making another video on that clumping aloes maybe in the future, so if you don't want to miss that, you can subscribe. So now we're gonna go with our Echeverias. So I have here my 2 different varieties of elegans. So this is the normal form of an elegans, and this is a Korean variety, probably a Potosina elegans or some cherry named hybrid of elegans. But you can see it has the same color and it has the same pupping habit. So it produced a lot of pups for me. So this used to be one plant, but it has already produced a lot of side pups. So that is an Echeveria that you would want to buy if you want a clumping succulent, the elegans. I also have here this Echeveria topsy-turvy. So this is a Renionii mutation. This is the upturned leaf version of Renionia, and you can see it has already a lot of pups underneath it. So if you want a clumping type Echeveria, the Renionii and the hybrids it has, I would really recommend that. We have a lot of different varieties of Renionii. Actually, I featured them recently on a care guide video, so I will probably link it down below. You can check it out. The normal version of Renionii actually has flat leaves, but the mutated form has these upturned leaves, and they're ones that produce a lot of clumps really quickly, and they're also fast growers. So if you manage to find a good potting mix for them and give them plenty of sun, then they will continuously grow. They're very vigorous growers compared with our other Echeverias. We also have here our Echeveria Harmsii, which is a recent purchase of mine. So you can see here that it looks like it's glowing because of the fuzziness of the leaves. Really beautiful, really stunning. Now recently this plant has been featured in Ma'am Laura Eubank's channel. So she uses this plant as a landscape succulent, but I would say that the only thing you have to be mindful of the Harmsii, it's one that will flower very quickly. So just as she said in that video, it's one that will produce these flower stalks really quickly. So they look like heads and then they become flowers later on. So that's what the plant does. So I believe that if you don't want those flowers to come up, then you can just cut it off. You can deadhead the plant, but it's one that will clump up very quickly. It produces a lot of heads very quickly, and it's a really nice clumping type of succulent. So I would really recommend the Echeveria Starlight if you want a clumping fuzzy type of Echeveria. And now, probably the hardest one to care for. This is a hybrid with an agavoides of some type. This is Echeveria Starlight. So it's one that will produce a lot of pups very quickly. So you can see here, you can see that it has a lot of babies. So I believe that if you've got a Starlight that is big size and it is single-headed, you can just wait for it to produce pups. It will produce pups very quickly once you manage to establish it. But since it's an Echeveria agavoides variety, you might want to give it more protection since it doesn't have a lot of farina, so it can tend to get burned if you give it a lot of sun. Yeah, and since it's a clumping type of succulent, you want to be very careful with watering this plant since it doesn't have a lot of air circulation in there. So you might want to be mindful of that, of clumping succulents, since they will tend to not dry out very quickly if they have a lot of branches on it. So they will have less air circulation in there, and their dried leaves can also be a problem. Removing those can be very difficult. So I've got a lot of dried leaves in this one. So maybe if it's dry already, I will probably remove those dried leaves. So you have to be mindful of that. So overall, I think that's about all the clumping type succulents that I will be sharing with you on this video. Hopefully you learned a little bit of how to care for them and the varieties that really clumps up very quickly. And also, if you want any other succulent to look like it's clumping, you can just pop the same plant on the same pot. So you can just have several plants in a single pot so that the plant will look much more lush, and it will also help with the drying out of the pot. So if your plant has a lot of roots, since it has a lot of stems, then their potting mix will also dry up very quickly. So that's what I would recommend when it comes to this type of succulents. So I think that's about all I can say. I hope that you really like this short introduction to clumping succulents. If you did, please make sure to hit the thumbs up below. And also, I will be making more of these groupings of succulents, so I will be making more videos about that later on. If you have any requests, then you can just comment it down below, and I would really appreciate if you subscribe to this channel. You will be really helping out a lot. And I think that's about it for this video, guys. I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.